I'm Isabelle Mercier, and in the poker world they call me No Mercy. I am the 2004 WPT Ladies Night Champion, and I'm sitting here today with my all-time favorite poker player.
Thanks, Isabelle. My name is Raymer. I'm the 2004 World Series of Poker Champion, and we would like to welcome you to this segment of the DVD where we're going to give you some poker tips, and we're going to teach you how to be a big winner in the poker world, just like us.
There are a lot of variations in poker games. What we used to play and what you see a lot in the Western movies is something called draw poker. Today, what is played internationally, what you see on TV is No Limit Texas Hold'em. It's called also the Cadillac of poker, and it's very exciting. It's a game that offers a lot of je ne sais quoi that brings a lot of excitement to the spectators.
If you don't know the rules for Texas Hold'em or any other form of poker that's commonly played today, you can go to Pokerstars.com and click on the right links, and you're going to find all the rules and explanations for all the games that are offered on the site. And that covers pretty much all the games that you're going to find in your local casino or poker room. So we're going to talk about Texas Hold'em. And of course, the first thing in Texas Hold'em is you get dealt your starting hand, 2 cards, and you have to decide whether you're going to fold or whether you're going to play the hand. Now, what you want to see is a premium starting hand. This is what we really love, pocket aces. That's the sweetest hand in the deck because it's a huge favorite. It's at least a 4-to-1 favorite over any other starting hand you might get. Exactly. But if you get pocket kings, you're pretty happy as well. You're usually smiling on the inside. Hopefully you got your poker face on the outside. Pocket queens, another premium hand, or ace king of spades, well, any ace king really, suited or offsuit, is another premium hand. When you get dealt one of these starting hands, you usually want to play them very strongly. You have a premium hand, you want to try to win a big pot with it. Sometimes you slow play and trap with them, but most of the time you are playing them aggressively, you're playing them strongly, you're trying to get your opponents to commit a big chunk of their chips now, before the flop. Because after the flop comes, these hands might not look so good anymore. Even pocket aces doesn't look very good when the flop comes something like 5, 6, 7, all diamonds. Now, if you don't get dealt one of the premium starting hands, you hope to get one of the second-tier starting hands. Pocket jacks is the top of that group. Pocket 10s, also a very strong hand, as is pocket 9s, pair 9s, or ace queen, suited or offsuit. Now, all of these are very strong hands, and even if you're at a full table of 10 players, these figure to be the best starting hand most of the time. But you're going to have to mix it up a lot more than you did with the premium hands. The premium hands, the aces and kings, you're going to play those strongly almost every time they're dealt to you. You'll only occasionally mix it up. These hands you're going to play strong most of the time, but not as often.
Greg's explanation on the premium hands is very interesting, but however, and unfortunately, you are not dealt those hands so many times in poker. So especially in tournament, you really cannot afford to wait for those hands, so you're going to have to open your game a little bit and play other starting hands. For example, you might decide to play an ace suited, because this kind of hand can give you the nuts. Not straight flush, not flush, some straights. You might also decide to play hands like king-queen suited or king-jack or queen-jack suited. Those are interesting hands with a lot of potentials, but again, you have to be aware if you're not drawing to the nuts. If you're going for the art flush, you have to know there's might be an ace-high art flush out there. You might also decide to play hands like 6, 7 of spade, which we call suited connectors. They open a lot of possibilities for straight flushes or flush. They might get you to win some big pots because they are very surprising. And the baby pairs, you can usually afford to see a flop with those pair. Remember, you are looking to hit your set. I mean, try not to lose too much money in those hands when you do not hit the other card. Greg and I are not gonna take you through some hands we've played in our tournaments. And the first one I want to talk about is about bluffing. Bluffing is important in poker. If you think you can win the whole tournament without bluffing ever once, it's possible if you're really lucky. If you think you can win 2, I don't believe it. I mean, you have to bluff at some point, and bluffing is really an art in poker. You have to build a story that your opponent is going to believe. You cannot do anything. So I'm going to talk about one bluff that I made at the World Series of Poker, $5,000 final table, and it's a bad one, but just to teach you what not to do when you are bluffing. So first of all, my opponent was in the small blind, and he decided to limp in without raising. I think we can show the hand. Yeah, open. So, king tree. I think king tree is in the small blind. I mean, king tree offsuit is not the best hand in the world, but in the small blind, heads up. I mean, you still have a king. It's a pretty decent hand. So my opponent just limped in. I looked at my hand, which was complete trash, 8 deuce offsuit. So I decided to check. I didn't put in a raise. So we saw the flop for free, and the flop came with an ace high, 7, and 4, 3 suits. So there is no flush draw, really. There might be some possible straight draw, especially in this situation, because we're in the blind in the unraised spot, but we don't know. My opponent decided first to check. So he gave me the turn to speak, and I decide I'm going to take a stab at this spot right now because my opponent just slimmed and now he checks. There's a chance I have any of those cards. I'm going to try it. And I bet about half the pot. So there's 8 chips in the middle. I bet 4 chips. Now my opponent, who thinks probably I'm going to raise with the ace before the flop, thinks I might not have the ace. At this point, he decided to call to see what's going to happen on the turn street. My opponent calls. I don't feel really good about that with my 8 deuce, but you know, maybe he's calling exactly for that reason. He doesn't buy my story. So now we see the turn card, and now it's another 4, which is somehow an interesting card for me because now I can really make my opponent believe I do have a 4, and now I have a very strong hand. So after my opponent checked again on 4th street, I decide this time I'm going to bet a little bit more. I bet 3/4 of the pot, so I bet 12 on this particular street. My opponent, still not buying my story, decides to call the 12. Remember, my opponent has a king high here, which means if I do not have an ace, a 7 or 4, he's beating me with the king high at this point, especially with this card doubling up. The 3 is less of a danger at this point. So my opponent called the 12 chips. This is a very bad news for me because, as you know, I have 8 high here. So now I'm really praying to see an 8 appear on the river card. River card came. It's the 6 of spade. That's not good for me. I'm praying for an 8. I mean, as strong as I can. My opponent checks again. Now I have 2 choices. I can take a stab at this pot or I abandon it because we all know my 8 is not going to make me win this hand. I mean, it's impossible that my opponent calls me on the flop and on the 3rd street with a smaller card than that. So I decide I'm going to take a stab at this pot. I have this tendency to try to win the chip, so I decided to bet. Problem is, my heart is telling me, go all in. This is the only way I can win this big pot. My head is telling me, he might call me. Maybe it's not going to work. You know, I'm going to play it safe. I'm just going to bet half of my stack. So I have this left if my bluff doesn't work. Instant call from my opponent. King eye, I muck my card. He wins the hand. So that's the lesson I want to show you is sometimes you got to go with your heart, your guts, and just do it. You have nothing, but this is the only way you can win the pot, so you got to do it. Don't do what I call half bluff. You're scared, you put half of your chips in, you get called, and then you're left with that, and you're out of the tournament.
Now I'm going to tell you about my favorite hand, because it's the final hand from the 2004 main event of the World Series, the hand where I became the world champion. I was heads up against David William. Isabelle's going to sit in for him, much better looking than David. He's a nice guy, but Isabelle wins easily. So while we're heads up, we have about almost 26 million chips on the table. The blinds are 50 and 100,000, and David has a little under 8 million chips, and I have 18 million or so. So I've got a good chip lead on David, but if he doubles up, we're going to be pretty close to even. Now, David is the big blind on the button, so he has to act first before the flop, but I'm going to have to act first on every other street. And David opens with a raise, 3 times the big blind to 300,000. David has ace-4 offsuit. Not a great hand at a 10-handed table, but when you're heads up, any ace is a very good hand, and he figures to be the favorite. Now, I looked at my hand, and I had a very nice hand for heads-up play, a pair of 8s. This is a very strong hand, and normally you would re-raise your opponent with this hand. But in this case, I decided I wanted to mix it up a little bit. I'm going to just call. We've got deep stacks. I'm hoping I can flop an 8, and that David really does have a good hand, and that maybe I can bust him all at once this one hand, instead of just raising now and winning a relatively small pot. So I flat call. We have 600,000 in the middle. The flop comes 2, 4, 5. Wow. This is a great flop for me. Now I'm first to act, and I check. If I had the best hand before the flop, I almost certainly still have the best hand, and I almost certainly have the best hand before the flop, the vast majority of the time. David is going to bet, I know. He's got the lead. He's raised before the flop. If I check to him, he's going to bet whether the flop hit him or not. I check, and he does bet. I think that was a good play. You know, he flopped a pair of 4s. He probably has the best hand. But if any card 6 or higher comes, it might beat him. So I think he has to make a bet there, and he was correct to do so. He bets $500,000 into the 600,000 chip pot, and I check raise him to 1.6 million, and he quickly calls. Now, I don't like the fact that he quickly called, but I don't think he's supposed to fold his hand. There's 2 diamonds out here. I could easily be on a flush draw with 2 big cards, and his pair of 4s is in the lead. So now the turn card is dealt, and it's another deuce. This is a horrible card for David, and it's a fantastic card for me. Unless he has a deuce in his hand, my pair of 8s still figures to be the best hand, because David doesn't figure to have improved with the deuce on the turn. And if he is putting me on a flush draw or some kind of bluff, then he knows this deuce probably didn't help me either, and his pair of fours is still good. I'm first to act. I bet 2.5 million chips, and David very quickly calls me. The river card comes deuce. Well, if he flopped a straight, I just beat him with a full house. But of course, if he has a big pair in his hand, and I decide if I check, he's going to check behind me, and I quickly decide I'm going to bet. And I'm sitting in the 4 seat, and I look up at Matt Savage, who's standing behind the dealer, and I say to him, I'm all in. Because I know as a tournament director, it's important that he hears me more so than the dealer or my opponent. And before I could turn my head to David sitting at the far end of the table, he's already said I call and turned his hand up. And so I thought I lost. If he can call all of his chips immediately, he must be able to beat a pair of 8s. Maybe he has quad deuces or something, and he's flipping his cards up. And I actually had to hesitate for a second or two and look at his hand and look at the board and think about what I held and kind of go back and forth in my mind. And I like, wait, I won. And then I turned my hand up, and then I still had to look like, did I? And then I finally let out the scream of joy. But it took me a few seconds to realize that I had won. He called me so fast.
We are now coming to the end of this DVD section. We really hope you learned a few tricks from us and a few tips. And hopefully we'll see you soon across the poker table.
But before we leave you completely, Isabelle and I want to play some real poker. So Isabelle and I have each put $5,000 up, and we're going to play some no-limit hold'em with blinds of 100 and 200.
Let me see that.
So does he have nothing, or does he have those pocket 8s?
A little raise. 400 more, sir, if you want to see the flop.
Let's go.
Okay. You're not showing a lot of strength. I mean, you flat call on the button, then you call the 400.
So obviously I have nothing, or I'm trapping.
Yeah, I'm gonna bet that flop. 1,200.
Flush draw?
What do you see?
I see.
Can you see through those?
I see 7-10 offsuit.
Oh, you do.
But you do have a club. And I don't want another club to come on the turn. So there was 600 before the flop and 1,200 now, which leaves 2,200 more. Is that right? Or is it 32? 3,200 more. So I'll make it 3,200 more.
You do, huh? I think you have the clubs. I call. Let's see that.
I don't have much of a hand. Oh, you paired the 8, you lucky dog.
And I'm the happy winner.
Good game.
Well played.
Yeah, the winners always say that.
I don't mean it.
You did, man.